Okay. All right, everybody. Welcome to the January 29, 2023 Tinderbox Meetup. And thank you very much. So typical format for the meetup is we go around and have new people introduce themselves, or people like Frederick that we haven't seen in a long time, give us an update on what's going on. Then if we have any projects or topics that we've been working on, people can ask questions about that. Like Tom Norris is doing some really interesting work for a museum. We might want to dig into that a little bit. Last week, Win volunteered, or we volunteered him to help us walk through some mind using the map view for thinking. So that was an agenda we have on topic for today's discussion. Mark Anderson was going to point out, how you could have two windows of Tinderbox open side by side and possibly be doing some port along that. This week, there's, again, credit to Win here, a recent ChatGPT craze, which, by the way, on the back behind the scenes on that, I've been working with Roger Alexander, who's building a API shell script, command line shell script for us, so that we can submit questions from Tinderbox into ChatGPT and have the answers come back. So hopefully within the next week or so, we'll have that demo up and running. Hopefully by next week, we'll be able to show that demo. And Roger's here, great. And then maybe Roger can give us an update on that project. And then the other thing I've been working on is I've actually successfully been able to connect Clockify, which is an enterprise time management tool, via the command line via Tinderbox. So now I can actually manage my meetings and my notes in Tinderbox, and then actually submit time tracking into the enterprise time management tool. So there's a lot that has been going on just in the last week since we've last talked. But let's dig in. So I think, Frederick, you want to give us an update? We haven't heard from you in a while.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So, I'm with this ongoing project of trying to not have a mess, right? And so I've made a mess by making notes in Apple Notes and making notes in text files, and you know the drill. We talked about this before. And now I've added Tinderbox to it, and making multiple Tinderboxes. So I'm feeling like I'm making more of a mess. But I guess my project that's coming up is to try to get all my notes out of Apple Notes into Tinderbox in an organized way. I make notes from things I read and things I think of and things I come across on the web and in articles and so on. And so you have all these little bits and pieces. It's not a project like you've talked about where you're writing a book or you're doing something meaningful. It's more like random stuff. And how do you turn that soup into something worthwhile? And I haven't quite figured it out yet. I think Tinderbox will help, but if
Well,
I just start dumping into Tinderbox, I'll just have another mess in another place.
yeah, and let me give you an idea on that. So if I can be so bold just to suggest a topic, so yesterday my in my Patreon session with my Patreon community, where we meet once a month, we were talking about something similar to that. And I think an idea that we were discussing might be helpful for you on that. And the core idea there is what we call I loosely call a resources folder. And the idea is when you're not working on a specific project, when you're not working on an output that you're looking to achieve, my recommendation is to take a coin from like the Zettelkasten mindset or any of the other numbers of different organization management mindsets, where you create kind of like this resources folder of atomic ideas. And so what you want to do is you want to kind of get your notes down to as a unique, and again, this is what Lumen had often said, is when you create a note, that note should be about one idea, properly tagged, properly cited, and properly linked. And so then that way you can then start creating this menagerie of insight that then can lead to you creating more output. So with that in mind, Frederick, maybe one thing you might want to think about is, as you're pulling them into Tinderbox, break those notes up into unique individualized ideas. And for me, like mine, I was in my industry, it's all around privacy. So it's a lot about regulations. It's a lot about standards. There could be a set of atomic ideas around projects, around different companies. I lost my mouse here. Around different companies, around people, around themes, terms. I mean, it doesn't really matter how you want to categorize those ideas, but to the extent that you want to have some very high level loose hierarchy, but not too hierarchical, because one of the things that we were talking about and what led us to this conversation is, a lot of people were saying, well, I've got entity, and then an entity has people, and then people do these activities. Well, if you start organizing your notes that way, well, what happens when people are related to multiple entities? What happens when activities are related to multiple people? What what you want to do is kind of get them at their highest of level that you can. For me, it's like people, company, entities, and then what you start doing is linking them. So you can say like this person Lou is linked to this project here, up here, and then that starts giving you that association. And then when you get around to start doing some work, you then can start and then you could have things like putting up an attribute here. Actually, I'll go like this. You could put an attribute here, and then maybe I got my people attribute there as well. Oops. And then ultimately what you then can do is, actually I don't call it people, I call it person, because people is already taken. And I don't think I did this sum up yet, but maybe I did. Yeah. And then what you do is in your people folder, for example, you would be running some action code in the background that would essentially effectively create a drop-down list for you, where you could essentially say, on this case, I don't really have it, but you'd have something like this. You'd say person attribute equals collect children name. Okay. And so by doing that, what that does is that's essentially collecting all of the names of these children of these notes. And then I can add the person attribute here. So you're effectively pre-populating that attribute with all of the values related to that categorical or core atomic idea of your thinking in your notes. So then later, when you're writing an article or something, you say, oh, and let's do that same mechanic here for term, just so I can demonstrate it, and then I'll shut up. So let's say I go to term here, and so rather than it being term, I'm going to say this, and I use short title. Actually, I'll just use term here. Use term like that. So now I'm collecting the term folder. So now if I add, and then obviously I'd have prototypes tied to these to make it easier. But let's say we say one term is called note taking. Note taking. We were just talking about privacy, so that's maybe another term you have in your document. And you can be defining your notes here like that. And so what you'll see here now, I can have the term folder automatically be collecting these children. I'm going to run that attribute, go back here. And why is that? Did I spell something wrong here? Term equals collect children. Oh, because there's not a name. Yeah, I did spell something wrong here, because I'm collecting the names of the children, not the terms of the children. So then by doing that, and maybe I didn't hit enter. Yeah, that's the problem. Got to hit enter when you make a change. You got to spell it right. Okay, so then you go like that. So now you see I've got these terms all aggregated up within this resources folder. So then when you're actually doing work, you can say, you know what, this note here is related to note taking, and that note over here, this note over here, and this note, we can add the term in there too, is related to privacy. So it's kind of a way for then when you start doing your work, you can start linking these terms and these concepts to these other notes. And then if you have some action code running in the background on these particular notes, you could have then Tinderbox automatically linking these notes to those notes, much like I'm doing here. And then you can start getting a core sense of what's going on with your file. So that's a really great way for me. I would think if at the start of when you don't really have an intended outcome of or output, bring your notes in at the most minimalist ability of structure you can, and then allow the structure to evolve as you're populating your related attributes and linking the notes together. So that's my idea on that.
So that's helpful. So for example, let's say I'm interested in security, and I'm aware in the Wall Street Journal that two guys shot up a electric transformer because they wanted to rob something and they thought they could get the power out that way, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of unusual and interesting. So I'd like to record a note about that, and I can record which Wall Street Journal article it was. That's my reference. I can say the guys shot the transformer as a note, just text. But then I have to go through the rigor, I guess, of figuring out which terms to associate with that. And that's where I get in trouble because I don't really have the time to sit there and analyze as I'm doing this sort of in the background, right? And so I want to say, well, it's security. I know that. Maybe it's IoT. Maybe it's electric grid. So, I could spend a lot of time on something that is a note that I just sort of wanted to remember. And so I get caught up in not doing that.
Well, and I think that's where you can kind of let the tool help you with that a little bit. So let's say, so I've just created a new folder here called news folder. And let's say we have a story. We'll call it, I don't know. And I always give prefixes, and then we can talk about that later. But like news, electric grid shot. You'll have whatever the title is, right? Okay. Now, there's a couple things that you can do that. You could simply be bringing that in as a reference. So one of the ways I would partially want to suggest managing that is get a tool like Zotero. And then if you have a tool like Zotero, you can, I'll show you in another file, but you can basically drag over references from a Zotero tool and have that, or you have what we call like site keys in your Zotero file. So if I were doing a news story, I'd have an attribute called citation key. And we were just talking about this before the call got started, in that not every tool can do everything, which is something David Eddy quoted, and I think that's really important to know. Tinderbox is great, but it's not your reference manager. It can be used to link to your reference manager. It can use to be making associations there. That would be great. So if I were, let's say my Stein article here was related to this news article here, I'd grab that site here, I'd give the anchor key like that. And so now I know Stein 2018 is my signal to go back to my reference manager to be able to get all the details of the publishing date, URLs, aspects about that particular program. You then could have, let's say I've got my lorem ipsum text here that you've dropped in an abstract about that story, especially if you're using a tool like Zotero. Often the reference manager, it can be EndNotes, Metal, there's any number of different tools that would grab the abstract for you. And so let's drop in the word security here, right? So one of the things you might want to do for part of your research is you would, at some level, want to write some kind of paragraph description of why this was important to you at the point that you captured it. You might want to, take that 2 or 3 minutes just for the, respective future self. Or you've got the abstract. And so then what you could do is, using the taggers functionality in Tinderbox, let's go ahead and let's just use tags for now. But let's say there is a word here, and we'll call it national security. I'm brainstorming here a little bit, and we'll just say the word security, and let's also drop in the word privacy here. Okay, and then what you'll want to do is, and Mark, or Anderson may have to remind me, what's the right way to, I can't remember the tagger. You got to tell which attribute.
Okay, so for each tag that you have, there needs to be an associated set. So there are about 4 of them built in.
No, I know that. But Mark, I'm trying to say is which what do you have to turn on to get that, or is that all? Is that the? I'm sorry. I'm thinking highlighters. You have to actually turn on a particular one.
Yeah, and also, funnily enough, I'm just doing some testing, and I'm not sure that NL tags is quite behaving at the moment. So if you want to play around with taggers, I'd probably make your own. Set type attribute,
natural language security.
In that I was doing the same tagging with NL tags and a custom one when I was updating ATBRef just yesterday on this whole subject, because I've just refreshed those articles.
Okay, so we're going to create a tagger called natural language security, which means that we now need to go create that user generated attribute, and you make it a set, so it doesn't have its duplicate. So we've now created a tagger of called natural language security. Anything, if the word privacy or security comes up, I want that to be tagged. I want this article to be tagged national security. So if I come here and sometimes you need to close the file to reopen it.
So basically, this process is sort of running in the background and trying not to stomp on everything else. And
Right.
the larger the document, the more gentle throttling it may do, simply so it doesn't get in the way.
And then we'll add the
and there isn't, as far as I'm aware, a force refresh for it. But if you restart the document,
right.
pretty much everything runs once on a document open.
Right. So here's what you've seen is this note automatically got tagged national security because the word security was in its text or its name. So you could set that up. That would automatically help with tagging. And then along the way, you could have then your own, self-managed tagging as you go along.
This is very interesting, and now I'm getting excited again. What did you use for the reference? Is it something just in Zotero, or did you use some other application as well?
No, so I use Zotero for I just closed Zotero accidentally. So I use Zotero exclusively as my here it's open up. I used Zotero exclusively as my note management or citation management tool. There is a plugin for Zotero. Let me pull it up. The benevolence of others, as Mr. Anderson talks about. Better Bib Tech. Zotero. Better Bib Tech. So I one of these days got to remember the guy's name. So he wrote or she, I don't remember, wrote a plugin for Zotero called Better Bib Tech, which is really the key, because what that does is that generates then this citation key that you can be using to manage your when you have a 49-inch monitor, that happens. That creates that key that you then can manage more succinctly with your files. And if I pull up one other file where I think I've got my reference code in it handy, I do. So if I pull up like this demo file I have here, what's beneficial about this is if you have the reference prototype installed, which I don't have on this one, let me pull it up. And once you actually get your stuff working to your delight, I gotta find the right article here. This one. And you kind of figured out, and this takes a while. I mean, it took me 2 years to kind of get my brain level set it to a way that would actually work appropriately for me. I gotta find the reference prototype that I've made here. And it's not in that file either. There it is. It is in this file. All right. So I have a prototype I call reference, which I'll drop in this file here. Okay. So, and then running in the background on this particular note, I have I'm calling a function I call reference. And what that function does is it goes out and it's the function reference. The function reference will go out and parse all of the data that I pull in from a Zotero feed. And this is all stuff I can give you. It doesn't really matter. So then if I go back to Zotero now and I drag Stein, sometimes I have to, sometimes you have to reset sometimes Zotero gets confused and it wants its, export. Oh, that's why I needed to set the export to a script that Roger and I were working on. Come on, Roger Alexander. There we go. So now when I pull in this file, Zotero is going to export out that item, and then my script automatically converts it, grabs the citation key, names the note, the citation, and then populates all of the attributes of that reference I've just pulled in. So if I were you, I would set this up. And if you had a news article, this is the way I do it. I see a news article I like, I add it to Zotero, I drag it over into Tinderbox. I've got some preset questions that I ask myself, then I answer really quickly. That also pulls in the abstract. If there happened to be one in this one, if there was an abstract, it would have pulled it in and had it been right here. Then the natural language would have automatically tagged that for you. and then you can then kind of go to town from there.
Wow, this is awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna ask if I can get some of these things from you.
Yeah, it's just, well, let's have a conversation offline.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So that wasn't really the intent on the agenda for today, but I hopefully we didn't mind that diversion. Mr. Anderson, you've had your hand up.
Well, I've put a note in the sidebar. I've updated the thing on taggers. In fact, well, Mark Burns is now here, so he can probably correct me. But I was going to say that, well, I was noticing one thing. Naming of attributes is a very personal thing. I mean, as long as they're allowed that, that's fine, and name them what you like. But doing something like NL, I can't remember what you call it, might make you confuse you. Built in, yeah, you know. So just to pass your comment there. But what I was getting around to saying is that when you make a custom tagger, essentially at the moment you're doing a case insensitive string search. And that might seem small beer, but it's running all the time. And once you set it up, it'll run for you. The built-in NL ones are doing something a bit more, but it's using underpinning frameworks. And it's early days for a lot of this thing. So the way to treat that part is if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, don't be surprised. You know, it will get better. But if you want, basically, so taggers, there's the natural language part, which is sort of built in and which you don't have access to because it's all behind the curtain. But building a tagger is a very neat way that once you've figured out stuff you want to basically auto tag. It's one way to think of it. It's like an auto keyworder. If you find this word, a case-insensitive version of this word, put this tag in the associated attribute. So you make a tagger note whose name is the name of an attribute, which must be a set. It doesn't do it for you automatically, but that sort of makes sense because sometimes we misname notes and things. So it doesn't matter in which order you do it, but until you make the set to go with the tagger, no tags will be populated. And then for any note where the tagger finds a match, it will put that tag into the relevant attribute for that tagger. And if it's removed, if it no longer has a match, it will remove it as well, which is why when you set up a tagger, the associated attribute is read-only. So you're passing control to the application, and it will track that for you. So that's another sort of subtlety to it that just so you're aware. I have updated the ATBRF article on this to try and make it a bit clearer. I just did that, I think, yesterday. It's a link in the sidebar. And right. I'll let Mark correct me if I've said some total calumny about the system. Right.
By the way, there was one other thing from this demo that we just did that I want to point out. In the launching of Tinderbox 9.5, when you add an @ sign to a name, Tinderbox interprets that as being a place. And you'll see here that Tinderbox actually then has created 2 places for me. One for Stein 2018 and one for Stein 2018, the whole thing. So this is a conversation we've been actually having in the backstage is like, what is the expected use of having an @ sign? And is that always associated to a place or a name and stuff like that? But so Mr. Bernstein, since you're here, I thought that was just another unintentional example of how @ being used and then unexpectedly creating the @ sign. The other thing that was introduced in 9.5 while we've got it is if it's like this is a note, and then if you hit pound and then type P, say like page, what that's going to do is tell Tinderbox to automatically associate the prototype P page with that note. Really, really great function, but again, unexpected consequences. I recently found is I was creating some an assignment for a class I'm teaching at Cal Poly, and so I was saying activity number 1, and I did that. And then what that does is Tinderbox thinks you're trying to create assign a prototype, and then what it ends up doing is actually creating the prototype number 1. So that's another unintended consequence of the uses of pound versus @ and that will get worked out over time. But I just want to kind of pull that out because I thought that was a real-time opportunity to talk about how the tool's working. Okay. So, Mr. Gale.
Hi, good morning. Sorry I was late to class, everyone. My question is, as you're using Zotero, which I used once upon a time, I'm just wondering if, as you know, Michael, I think I use PaperPile. Is the process manageable from your experience using PaperPile as well,
Yeah,
or something
I
like
actually did it.
that?
I actually did it at one point. At some level, they all work in the right way. It's just little tweaks. Like what you need to look at what their output is. And sometimes you need to change the pattern matching for how PaperPile is outputting something versus Zotero versus EndNotes.
Sure.
But yeah, they're all similar in that regard. So yeah,
Okay. Thanks.
don't feel you have to use Zotero. You don't. PaperPile should work just fine. If that helps, and you and I can talk offline, and we'll make PaperPile work for you.
Thank you. Michael, to the rescue.
So, Frederick, are we done with that topic right now? We can catch up later.
Yeah, thanks.
All right,
I wanted to add a couple of things on Frederick's question, if that's
Perfect.
okay.
Perfect.
So coming at it from a different angle, one of the things that's interesting about the way that Sankey Ahrens describes the process of taking notes and how to take smart notes, which you don't have to agree with everything, is that one way to think about it is, when do I want to be reminded of this note? As far as how much work you're going to put in to integrating it into a system. And so with the article that you were describing, it might be that, oh, I want to save this in case I'm doing something that's related to attacks on power grid stuff someday. And having just stashing the article in something like DevonThink may be and then you can search that later, because search is a fine way to find things, especially in a curated collection where you sort of know what you're looking for. And so you may or may not want some of the overhead of the notes. One of the other things Ahrens talks about is making sort of quick notes while you're working on something, and then deciding the important 3 or 4 for the day that you're going to really integrate into your carefully curated note system and attach it to other notes and things like that. I think those are valuable ways to think about what you're doing instead of trying to force everything into the same pile, especially since it's much easier to accumulate notes digitally than it is if you write them out by hand. Sort of a hand system, there's friction involved.
Yeah.
So those are some different ways to do some of this that don't necessarily mean sort of building out a complex thing somewhere.
So when that's what I meant when I was trying to say, there's 2 ways to like associate a note with a reference. I could just grab the citation key and know all of the details of that citation or in my reference file. I don't need to bring in all of the publishing details because I know all that in the reference document. But I do need the key, so I can associate that note with that key. That just minimal key linkage is critical. However, I find that if I actually do want to be taking notes about that, and let me pull back up this file just to make show the value of Tinderbox here. If I do want to be taking notes on that particular news file, and I'll share my screen. You're right. At that point, you very well may, and again, I would do it as a kind of a 2-step process. If it's a different file here. If you're just pulling in the raw note, you pull in the raw note and stick that in the raw notes bucket, so you know that that's going to take more triage. And in talking through the Ahrens book, he refers to it. It becomes a Zettel using Luhmann's language when it does, in fact, when it's written in your own words, it's cited, and it is one atomic idea. Until then, it's just raw notes. And so what you want to be doing is separating those quote unquote Zettels from your unprocessed raw notes. But going back to the example we were using with the news story, I find that for me at least, when I'm doing this, where my share screen go away? When I'm doing this, the value comes into play when if I actually want to at the moment interrogate that news story. As I said, I'll drag it in. I'll get my place notes here. And then at that point, I can start writing notes. Now, what's really interesting here, and I might actually already have it. Let's see if I've got my on ad. Yeah. So you'll see here, I've already got my on ad. So on ad, citation key equals citation key parent. And then I'm giving my prototype of P page. And I've since changed this convention here. So I just got to make it like that. All right. So what's going to now happen is every time let's say, as I'm reading that article, and more often than not, what I will have is like the article off to the side like this. So I'll be reading the article side by side between my Tinderbox and doing the notes if I'm doing it in real time. So when I'm adding that note to here, I can say, here's a note, here's a concept, and you'll see that Tinderbox automatically, because I use the on ad, populated this note with the citation key of @Stein. So then this note, which I have now related originally to that news story, is now linking back to that original note. And you can do a whole bunch of on-ad type functionality to help you populate terms and any attribute or perform any other related function as you're interrogating and building that out. The other way to do it would be you create a bunch of lorem ipsum. I'll just do this right now. You create a bunch of notes that you're taking here, right? And then when you're ready to actually explode that, you can go in and say, you know what? All right, now I'm going to break these notes into different sections, come up with a pattern that you can do. Then you do an explode. Let's explode on the hashtag. And now it's going to automatically create those exploded notes for me. Grab those up here and you'll see those notes get done. And now because I've added them, they take on the citation key. So that's another way of kind of interrogating your notes and creating new notes based on material you're reading or researching along the way. I've got another really great way of handling that and a qualitative data analysis approach if you're like analyzing interviews, but that will be for another topic. So hopefully that helps. We did that really fast, and you can watch the video later, but hopefully that helps.
And I think, Michael, like all your stuff, it's really interesting to see the structure and the detail and how you use things. The point I'd like to reinforce on this is that, for example, and I'm just making stuff up with the Wall Street Journal article that Frederick mentioned, is if I'm generally interested in attacks on the grid stuff, and I'm thinking maybe I'll write an article about that someday, it may be sufficient to stash the article because that's a topic I have in mind. And the search will bring those up, or I just make a folder of them, because I'll want to go back and review the details. And I probably wouldn't take all of the notes on the details I would want for that article from it. On the other hand, if I'm thinking, I'm interested in the way people rob banks. And there's this weird thing that happened, is like shooting up the power grid to rob a bank. Then I probably want to record that because it's not findable in the same way. Because I'm not thinking about that for it. And I'd probably write a note in my system that referenced the article in all the ways you're talking about it and said, like, weird way to rob banks for it. So it has to do with, I'm just using Aaron's because he published the book with it, this idea about when do I want to come across this thing is a way to think about it. And if it's sort of squarely within a topic you're interested in, search can maybe enough for that, especially if you want to get details. In a lot of my historical research, I'm finding a weird historical fact in a paper that is not really about that thing. And then I definitely want to call that out in my system of notes. So there are lots of ways to approach this, and sort of the high level without necessarily trying to impose a lot of structure on it may work as well. That's all.
Yeah, and one last point though, you made a note where you like stash the article somewhere. Some people might want to stash the article in Tinderbox. The stash the article would probably be better done in like a DevonThink or an Eagle or your files or your folder system.
Right.
And then you can drag the link, either the local file path or the DevonThink URL into Tinderbox using the file attribute. So that way you actually have an archive of that article you can go to later, but you're not polluting Tinderbox with a bunch of unnecessary words or PowerPoint files and images that you don't need at this moment. So that's another key part of this strategy of using the right tools in the right way. That worked for you. And again, our right tool category. There is no one right tool. There's categories of tools, and then you'll find within each of those categories the tool that will work for you.
I have a ton of stuff in Devonthink for my projects and potential projects and ideas I want to dig into.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Now, do we want to switch to Win showing us how his thoughts on using the map view? Are you ready for that, Win? Or do we want to?
Sure.
Just a quick one to put on the chitty for today, because we sort of said we do it in the forum. I don't mean before Win, but the guy whose name has escaped me now, who gave us his example in Cyrillic and Tibetan, and we can think about a very different sort of mapping.
Yeah. Do you want to put? Do you have that handy? You could pull up.
I do. I can share it when we get there. But let's crack. I just wanted to put that on the sort of on the slate.
Why don't you share it now to kick it off, because that's where it really kicked off this conversation, and then we can hand it off to Win and have him.
Okay. Yeah. 1 moment. Let me just open it up. In fact, oh, here we go. I have it open. Excuse me, I just share screen. So hopefully you're seeing this one. So you seeing some? Are you seeing a Tinderbox screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Actually, it's quite funny. When I opened it up, this is what I saw, which I thought was quite funky. An interesting thing, if this does happen, just click on the tab and that will force a redraw, and then everything will come in place. So this is a guy, I'd have to look on the forum to remember his name, and we were going around the houses and he was sort of saying, how do I use a map better? And he also dropped in the fact, as you can probably see on screen, we've got, I don't know whether Tibetan's written in Devonagari or whatever, but we've got a bit of script here. In fact, that note has in its title, it's got Tibetan script, English and Russian, and Cyrillic. So there you go. I'll hand back now, but that's the thing that I was referring to.
This is what kicked off this whole how do we make sense out of map view discussion most recently. So Win, you want to walk us through your thinking?
Sure. Can I share the screen?
Yep. Sorry.
Okay. So just a background for this. Last week, I am an inexperienced Tinderbox user, but I've been interested in it for a very long time. And so this is trying to explore some of that, and in particular was inspired by the discussion we had last week about map versus outline view, and trying to think about what it means to use as a tool for thinking. And so I'm going to walk through some stuff. To some of you, this is going to seem incredibly simplistic, but part of it is new user onboarding in a way, and trying to understand it. So we'll go with that. I'm comfortable with complex software. I've been doing software for a long time. I use Emacs for heaven's sake. And so the fact that it's complicated, has a lot of these things, doesn't bother me. It's trying to figure out how to get in and get to the point of figuring out when and how I want to use things, as well as discovering what's there. I really like the idea of using it in ways that I don't have another tool to do. I can do outlining perfectly well in Emacs, actually, and with some very flexible, easy to do stuff accumulated through experience on rearranging the outline and viewing it in different ways and so on. So the outlining piece by itself is not compelling. There are lots of outlining tools. The question about how can I use it to help me think better is a really interesting one. And that's what I want to explore today. Michael talks a lot, and I really appreciate this, as using it as a tool for output, especially when you're trying to compose output from a number of pieces that you want to be consistent. I think that he's done some fantastic stuff with that. I might be interested in that. I don't know yet for what I'm doing. So we're concentrating on this thinking question. And there are a couple of obvious approaches to learning it. There are probably some more. One is that, and we talked about this last week, having a specific task in mind. I want to do X. And then the other thing is, what can it do that I don't know about? Because that's what's making it interesting for it. And I'll learn some things both ways, but I'm especially interested in the discovery. So I started, what I'm going to show you is a succession of things that I did in a couple of journal writing sessions. I write with a fountain pen and a notebook almost every morning for a while, and a couple of them were, what am I thinking about Tinderbox? So I typed it into an outline for it, and there's a little bit of outline structure for how I might use it, and what I would need to design for a class that I'm teaching, and then a bunch of these questions. The questions themselves don't matter that much for the point of view of what we're talking about today, and we're going to take a look at some of it. So I can do the outline, and I can start rearranging the outline to be more outline-ish, but that didn't seem like much fun. And one of the things I found, I've often done in groups a brainstorming exercise where you write things on Post-its and you put them up on the wall and you rearrange the cluster of the Post-its and everything. And a few weeks ago, when I was feeling a little overwhelmed with the variety of stuff I was thinking about and preparing for teaching a college class, which I've never done before, I had stuff online, I had notes on my desk, and felt a little overwhelming. So I wrote down every idea on a Post-it, I put it up on my wall, and I rearranged it. And that dovetailed with what we talked about. So here's a map view of that same outline that we did. I clicked arrange, and it's hard to see, and I'm not using a big screen right now, but you can sort of just get an idea. This is the same stuff. It's just sort of laid out visually. And what I'm interested in is that the exercise of Post-its on a wall, there's a spatial component to it that an outline doesn't have. There's no hierarchy. There's grouping, and themes can emerge that way without having had to name them as part of the outline or something. So I started to rearrange the things on the screen by dragging them around. So this is the same things as on the previous one, but I've started to group them. So up in this corner, and I'm using a little spatial memory here now, like why Tinderbox? I'm still a new user, the wall Post-it notes thing. Down here, I've got the generating documents from pieces and an approach on focus on output that Michael likes to talk about, relationship to citation data. This question that actually bears on our previous discussion here, thinking about specific projects versus a general archive of notes for things that I'm collecting that are interesting for possible future work. How does it relate to these are just the things, and I'm trying to group them in some way. And now I think I'm using this as a tool for thinking, right? This moving them around and clustering things is helping me understand the mental space here a bit better. And so then I made adornments for them to label these things I found. And interestingly, there's no hierarchy here. I could turn this into an outline, but it's not in particular sequence or hierarchy. It's grouped with some labeling on it. And what this gets me to is there are some things that, like, I've heard about these Tinderbox features. Some of this has actually inspired some of the questions I was asking ChatGPT, is like, just tell me about these things. And we can talk about that separately for it. And then here's a focus on how do I want to use it, so I can think about the question that Michael often says, what do you want to do with it? And it ranges from, I can try to do a blog post, or I could try it on a book. I do both kinds of things. And these things that are in the using it as a thinking tool kind of aspect. And this idea about what I don't like about it. I don't like mind mapping tools. And then I realized that almost all the presentation of mind mapping tools that I've seen not counting this as a mind map, although I think it kind of is that they're sort of isomorphic to an outline. And the visual structure may help some people, but it's basically still the same thing. It doesn't yield as much flexibility at getting out of the outline world for it. And this as I found it useful to go through this exercise, although part of it was motivated by wanting to show you something today, for it as a way into using things. And there are some pretty clear ways that then I can use adornments in more interesting ways to indicate these are the things I want to pay more attention to across this right away. By doing that, I can think about where I want to use stamps. I can think about, do I need action code for anything? It's giving me a little structure for it. Did not get to linking because I ran out of time, but that's clearly something that I'm interested in. If I were doing this for my class, which I'm going to be doing in the next few days, one of the things I want to use links for is to indicate, oh, I need to do this topic before I do that topic. Because there's no natural sequence in what I'm teaching for a lot of the things, but there is for prerequisite knowledge, like how the internet works in computer security. So linking, I think, is a very valuable thing. It just didn't happen to make it onto this, but I would definitely be doing that right away. So that's what I've got. It's probably not really all that interesting, but it was helpful for me to go through it. Thanks for the airtime.
Yeah, why don't you leave that open too? So for me, going back to the point of output, I think this is fabulous and it's great. One of the things that you might consider, or people might consider, is using the attribute or the adornments on add functionality. So if you use an adornment on add functionality, you can have, when I add a note to this adornment, in other words, when I drag this note on top of this adornment, you can have that note take on properties from the adornment. You could either have it take on the color, you could have it, take on values, attribute values from the adornment. So that's going back to Frederick's earlier question, that's a great way to populate attributes without thinking about it. Because if that adornment is related to learning Tinderbox, it's related to learning to Tinderbox, and it's purple, that note could take on all of those attributes just by automatically by dragging it onto the adornment. So that's if we want to demonstrate that now, we could pretty quickly. The other way to do this too is if you've got a total hot mess of notes in the map view field, you could use a smart adornment function, which is essentially using the agent capability or query capability on an adornment. And what that would do is any note on that map view that meets the criteria of that query would get pulled over and placed on top of the adornment. So that would also help you auto organize your notes on top of the adornment. So I think all of this is great. The challenge I have, though, because I'm so focused on output, is if you don't mind, Win, if you could, on the tab you're on, could you right mouse click on the tab and click outline? Right. So the challenge I have when I'm doing my kind of research is I now want to go write a report about that map. But the outline doesn't afford any hierarchical structure that would one typically expect in a linear report that you would be providing, in terms of heading 1, heading 2s, here's the topics we're talking about, here's that figure I want to drop in here. And that, if we harken back to what I've been talking about with, this flattened map view concept, this is where I'm struggling between thinking with the flattened map, like you just did there, and trying to manage my heading level output report. And if anybody has, I'm really struggling with that because I find I'm having to duplicate my work or duplicate notes, and doing it with aliases doesn't work. For a whole bunch of other reasons that we won't be able to get into now, but that hopefully illustrates some of the areas where I've been struggling.
So I have a suggestion. Sorry, go ahead.
So Michael, I agree with that, and when I was, and because we've talked about this before, in fact, or you'd talked about it before, I was sort of explicitly thinking in terms of not worrying about that for what I'm trying to do here, because I don't think that the output of this exercise for me was thinking through what's going on. And it's also not complicated enough that I couldn't, do the outline out of it if I just wanted to write all of this stuff, but it's not even reduced to that level yet. And what my next step would be is, I've got a few things to pick out of this that are kind of interesting, because now I've got a little bit of a framework like, I can look at stamps with an idea about I've done this now, so I can learn about that. I could try writing a blog post with it as take that as an action for it, that I probably encounter the problem you're talking about is in getting there for it. Certainly I didn't encounter that with a book.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just the goals are different, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too. I mean, so a different example would be, I'm writing a process flow map, or I'm writing an architecture diagram, and then I later want to write about that process flow or that architecture. And here's the key for me. I don't want to mess around with the map, because actually what I want to do is I want to take a screenshot of that map and include it in my report. So creating the map and then reorganizing it defeats my purpose, because I don't want to reorganize the map to get some outline order.
So Michael, just a suggestion on this score. So I was looking for, but I don't see that there's a way of listing in the outline view the adornment that a particular note might be sitting on. But you could also generate just a quick, a programmatic way. So without actually touching your map, you could switch to outline view and just add a column that indicates which adornment your particular note is sitting on, or even just add values.
Art, you're absolutely right, and that can be done just simply by a simple on add. Drop the note on the ad, and you could have an attribute called adornment and have it, put that adornment's name. That works.
Yeah.
The problem is you still don't have the hierarchical output of this is a heading 1, this is a heading 2. Here's where I want the image to go. It doesn't, when you're looking to actually publish into, say, like a Word document or a hierarchical structure in HTML, all of that falls apart.
So I mean, okay, this is just a basic idea, right? So you have your subtitle. If I were running through, if we could switch back to Win's other map, hold on, I don't even know what I have going. So
that one, or the outline view.
Yeah. So but now, for example, if you're in the map view, right, and you go, can you go back to the map view which had the thank you. So say, for example, the white Tinderbox, right? You could enter a subtitle value for that and just type in H1. You go into map versus outline, type in on subtitle H2, and then you sort in your outline view by the subtitle, and immediately it begins to show you a hierarchy. Or you can even set it up so that you run through the whole app with a bunch of stamps and go, if it's H1, then you drop it into a second level path or third level path. Because I mean, to me, the whole advantage, like when I first started getting into sort of mind mapping, the problem was it had this whole tree, branch, leaf, fruit analogy, a metaphor, which forces me into a structure, a hierarchy, which I don't actually necessarily want until my thoughts are sufficiently congealed to be able to order them. So that's actually for me the map view, if and when I use it.
Right, but again, my point of cake and eat it too. I want the map view and I want my outline view. I want both. I want map view. I want a flattened map view, but I also want a hierarchical, structured outline view for a report.
That's what I think he was. I forget who was speaking before, but I was thinking the same thing. Why, in this picture, we have headings like why Tinderbox and what do I want to use it for? And if I were able to collapse these, so I just saw that text without all the other detail in the box, I could then look at those pieces of text, each of those colored boxes, and say, what's the flow of discussion? And I'd pretty much have an outline, except that some things would get demoted and some wouldn't. You'd probably start with why Tinderbox and what's it for? That would be a chapter, right?
No, I know, but if you then flip over to the outline view, all of
It's
those
not
notes,
there. Yeah.
you've got 500 notes all in a row, and you lose the ability to actually then collapse those. The problem is when you have 500 notes, and in some cases, some of my reports will have 2,000 notes. I can't have 2,000 notes all in a row. Sometimes I want to collapse the thinking down to, here are the 5 subjects. I want to actually move subject 1 and all of the notes associated with subject 1 above or below a different subject. And if you have all 500 notes at the same level in an outline, that ability to do that breaks down very quickly. So
but in the map view, can't you do that? Can't you sort of now take it to the next step and drag these boxes over each other to make them?
No, because if you do that, you lose your map. You've now destroyed your map.
So, I mean, my mind is going in 2 different directions. One is to actually get out of map mode entirely and use a flat file outline structure, or use an app like Task Paper that allows you to flip your lines up and down and then sort of then put them into hierarchy as they become firmer. But the other direction in which my thought is going, you said you couldn't use aliases for some reason. But I mean, if you had the ability to say, as you generate a note, you could drop a subtitle information or decide, depending on which adornment you dropped it on, that it would populate another attribute. You could essentially set up an agent to create the hierarchy in a separate folder for you.
Yeah, the challenge with that is if you spend hours and hours getting the map properly right, and then you've done it using an agent, and you accidentally unclick the don't reorganize.
I like the accidentally.
Oh yeah, that would be.
You just lost hours of work. If you accidentally delete the original note, all of those associated aliases disappear.
There's always revert.
Yeah, it gets complicated when you have, and then think about when you have a file like one of mine that's got 10,000 notes. I have 2 books and 6 reports, all being written in the same document.
I mean,
having some dependencies. So there are some legit edge case issues that I'm talking about as you move farther into deeper uses of output methodology that Wynn even admits that he hasn't been approaching as of yet.
Yeah, I can't see a scenario where you have the hierarchy as well as the map, a flat map. It doesn't make in my head. It doesn't compute. I can't even see it. Like how can you generate a hierarchy? Again, like I said, your column view is your friend here, in my opinion.
Not for output. Not like, well, I'm talking like publishing the report out of Tinderbox, not going to another file. Mr. Anderson, got a question?
Well, it's something I just reprised something I sort of mentioned in the forums in this is, and I put something in the chat. What's happening here in the map is we're sort of conflating, I think, 2 sorts of work. I mean, the real USP of Tinderbox's maps are they're a fluid thinking space, and they are one-dimensional, but you put things where they are because it helps with this sort of spatial and associative sort of memory we have. We put things where they need to be. The difficult point comes where you now want to put a formalism on it. And that's when I find your mind goes into tidy mode and we start putting boxes and lines and prettifying things up. And then we want to make an outline. And I don't think the 2 fit well together. And this is why I think that the notion of a flattened map is a dangerous one, because what you're going to end up is something like the Obsidian graph, which is just an algorithm. The map we're looking at on screen here has no algorithm that's placed that's been placed by a human being thinking, I want to put that there, I want these things to not be with those things. And an algorithm will really struggle with that, or not unless you give it lots of prompts. And that's a sort of a line across which we sort of trip too easily. It's not that, and none of this is to say that we aren't going to want to formalize stuff to put an outline, but I mean, my feeling is it's almost like a separate view. If you want something,
it is a separate view. It is a separate view.
So I mean, well, one way to think of it is, I mean, there is a view that is that it's chart view. It's not particularly spatially efficient, but it's been there since the day dot. But I don't think anyone's seen the chart view gets no love at all. And of course it has the same outlining thing. The problem with flattening a map is generally the conversation is in terms of one level of depth, and then when it moves to real world projects, we're down to 9 or 10 levels of depth, and the whole thing falls apart because as you try and expand bits, they won't fit where they were, so your visual structure actually breaks down. So there is actually more of a challenge than perhaps we suppose in that, and I don't pretend to have an answer.
Okay. Any other thoughts, ideas?
Yeah, sorry, I was still wondering why it's not possible to maintain concurrently a flat map view and have an outline view that's hierarchical, but not of the actual nodes, but of aliases of those nodes. So your structure is building in the background in a separate folder called, my outline version of this flat map view.
Links become problematic.
Very problematic.
It's one of these unfortunate accidents of birth. It is that some while back, longer probably than I think it was, this came up, and in a sense, links probably favor export. That's where the balance of opinion was at the time, right. Which is why, for instance, you can't make an agent look at the map in the agent and see all the links, basic and text links, between the things in the map. I won't dive into the detail why that is, but it's difficult to do both at once, and that's why aliases are powerful otherwise. But it's the difference between aliases can be two things, and I think Devon had been through this. I don't know if it's still doing it, but apparently there was some time that everyone got very confused. I think they have a thing called a replicant. Are you wanting the same thing to be in every place, acting exactly the same, or are you wanting something that is like a file system alias? It just says, if I look at this, I'm actually not looking at the thing I'm looking at, but I'm looking at something else because it's telling me where it really is, and that's a slight difficulty to resolve, and there isn't an easy one-size-fits-all solution for that, which is obviously why we have these sort of discontinuities we do.
Okay, I have one thought. I mean, it's a wild and crazy thought. Supposing you resorted to watch folders, and so you have two Tinderbox projects watching the same notes. One you can organize hierarchically, and the other one you do as a map.
Watch folders work very differently, and I don't think they are persistent in that way. You also have performance issues when you have too many watch folders. And again, when you're let's not take up the time in this document because a lot of us aren't interested in output and reporting like as much as I am. You run into some really serious issues for consistency and maintainability of your report. I mean, when you're writing reports, one of the things is you have to make sure, if you spent hours writing that map, that process flow diagram, you don't want it to all of a sudden disappear or get reorganized on you or changed in any way. Or when it does change, you want to make sure it changes as expected. Likewise, when you're writing a 450-page report, having thousands of notes in one container doesn't work. So there's just a lot of tactical mechanics that happen when you're writing big pieces of material.
I can see you're very far ahead in the whole idea of generating large reports and doing output, and I'm not even going in that direction. So it's hard for me to see what pitfalls you might come up with.
Yeah, Mr. Anderson.
I've got one quick one to add to that. It's not sort of the answer to everything, but just another little sort of wrinkle thing you can to bear in mind is that when you put something on a map, it has an XPOS, YPOS. Basically, it has an X and Y coordinate where it is on that map. And it is the case that if you demote it and promote it, it may change because when it moves to a new map, there may be something already in the position where it was on the previous map. So that's why it's not fixed. There is nothing to stop you if you don't want notes, sort of objects, agents, containers moving around on the map, that you can actually store the XPOS, YPOS that you absolutely want to, such that you could have a stamp that you could just stamp anything, say, reset your X and Y position to these stored things. That's fine, except if you have a sort of very elegantly arranged set of link lines that you may have manually sort of put in position, that won't survive. I don't think a note remembers when you move it around where which side of the thing it left. But again, it's a partial solution that if you have no link line, so if you wanted to take this map that we're seeing on screen, move it into an outline and back, it would allow you to do that, because you could move everything back into this thing and just say, I want you to take on the XY position that I've stored in these two attributes.
The other thing about that too is, like, I did this type of mapping for over 35 academic technology adoption theories using the alias approach, for instance. And to this point, all the links got munged up and it just became impossible to use over time. The other thing that happened was, if you're using aliases, you can't copy them into another Tinderbox file. So let's say I spent all of this energy and time creating this beautiful process flow diagram. I now want to move it to a different document. Aliases can't be copied over into a different document. And so that also creates other issues you can think about when you're working on multiple projects across multiple files. So there's a lot of little things to be nuances to consider when you're going down this path.
And your aliases cannot possibly be the ones that are on a map, huh?
No, again, but they can, but again, you've got linking issues, you've got naming issues, you've got potential collision issues, and most importantly, I work on multiple Tinderbox files. So if I want to copy that map from one file to another, can't do it if it's based on aliases. Because the aliases don't copy over.
Okay, but Mark B just said that you can copy aliases to another document if you also copy the original. But
right,
I guess locations would not save. Yeah.
But where is the original in my yeah, that's correct. But where is the original in my document? Going back to the beginning of this conversation, I may have a resources directory with literally a couple thousand notes in it, where my atomic notes are. If I then generate aliases out of those in a whole separate part of the file, how am I going to easily be able to pull the 50 of that particular map out of the five directories in the resources directory over? It just becomes not.
I would export my map as a bunch of JPEGs and then manually go and line up a few thousand nodes to JPEG.
That doesn't become practical. Yeah, Steve Harf.
It's been an interesting discussion, and from last week, I know that Mark Anderson was sort of proposing a different kind of view as an alternative to the map view. What this discussion is sort of highlighting for me in an area that I'm sort of very curious about, interested around, and that is the nature of aliases as they exist within Tinderbox. There are some intrinsic values, and then there are some inherited values. But to a large extent, those were design choices. And not all of the challenges that we have related to this whole discussion, not all of the challenges are limitations of aliases. But from a brainstorming standpoint, what would happen if all of those assumptions and restrictions about how aliases currently are within Tinderbox, we loosened, or we envisioned a different sort of alias? At one extreme, an alias is simply a stand-in for the original note. At the other extreme, an alias is simply a reference to the original note, and the alias itself is sort of a full-blown note all on its own. It just, in some ways, references back, like points to the original note. And what we have, at least conceptually, is the definition of an alias within Tinderbox, which is somewhere between those two extremes. But maybe the answer lies in a different kind of alias. Just sort of throwing it out there. I know implementation-wise, it's probably very difficult, but maybe that helps us unlock this particular problem.
Question for Mark A, perhaps, is so on an alias, is there a way to record or to insert XPOS and YPOS?
I've just put a note in this just about intrinsic things. The XPOS and YPOS are intrinsic in an alias because it has to be, if you're going to use it say, on a different map, it may be in a different position. So it will be very difficult if it could only be where its original is. There is nothing to stop you. The point here is it all becomes extra work, at which point people roll their eyes and say, I don't want the extra work. But if if that was the bind you were in, there's nothing to stop you creating user attributes to store an X and a Y pos that you may want to basically force set. So you might say, I want you to go onto this map, but I actually now want you. So for instance, you could have an agent that could find lots of things. And then you could say, right, well, what I want you to do is I want you to set your X and your Y pos to the value that I've stored.
Yeah.
I mean, it will get you some of the way there, but I'm very aware, having been down most of these rabbit holes in the past, that the problem does come that when you take linking, if you're not using linking, what I've just mentioned, I think is perfectly doable. When you put linking into it, it gets more complicated. You can also, because which you couldn't do back in the past, you could use action code to basically find out what the original sort of link environment was and recreate it.
All right.
But I'm conscious that it's one of those things that what you could do and what you sensibly ought to do are probably two different things. But in a sense, you could get bound up in a lot of complexity quite fast. So I would approach it with caution. Start with the thing is, if that sort of sounds like a thing to do, I would definitely do some small tests, because it's easier to find early on that actually it doesn't quite do what you want to do, or it's going to be very difficult to do at scale before you sort of get halfway into the project and have the same discovery, and then there's an upside down smiley face moment,
Yeah. And I think it's really important at this stage of our conversation too to realize that, it's this balance between knowing the limitation of the tool and knowing what you want to do, and then finding that balance for yourself. So like for me with Tinderbox, I've absolutely found the balance. I'm absolutely ecstatically happy with Tinderbox. Could I figure out different ways to use the tool to be more efficient? Yes. Could the tool add things that might help me? Yes. Does that mean I'm dissatisfied with the status quo and where I'm at right now? Absolutely not. So I think that it's kind of finding that balance of your set of tools. I think is a real critical personal journey that everyone goes through. Okay. Any other discussion topic along these ideas? Wynn, this was a very healthy conversation. Thank you.
My pleasure, Michael. I hope it was enjoyable. It is, of course, it is very simplistic compared to what Tinderbox can do, trying to figure it out.
No, but I think this is where most people start. And even with that, I think it's an awesome start. And then you go from there. So maybe we can switch to Mark Anderson explaining how we can associate the two windows side by side.
Sure. Right. Okay. Well, first of all, I'll share. Oops, let me. Wait a second. Why? Just why? For some reason, I'm getting all my. Which are you seeing this screen?
We're seeing a black
screen.
Oh, right. Sorry. It's being. I know what's happened. So I've got notifications sticking on the window maximize. It's joys of multi-screen user Zoom. Right, let me start again. Let me I'll first of all get on the right screen. Leave that for a side. That this is the case we talked about earlier. What we were going to talk about was what a new file. Okay, which is moving. Just move some stuff out of the way. So the fact that originally in the Tinderbox 6 rewrite, there was vast pressure from people to have a single window app which is in a sense what the default window looks like, but that rapidly proved to be a case that wasn't actually that helpful. So you can have multiple windows. Sorry, I've made this is the same. This is a new unsaved document, but these both belong to the same document, Untitled 2 now. So you can have multiple windows. What I can do is I can have a different focus in one window to another, but you'll notice, for reasons it's just a constraint, that whatever you're looking at in these two windows, the note in the active window will be focused in any other windows in the same document. It shouldn't matter. It's more that it just somehow feels odd. In most cases, it doesn't matter. And the other thing is that if you want to, for instance, look at note A whilst looking, but you like to see note B at the same time, what we can do is Command Option X. Sorry, it'd be easier if I put a bit of just context in here too. But I can have a so-called text note. And a text note will show you the notes displayed attributes. The only thing you can't do with one of these standalone text windows is you can't use the little link dragging tool. But it's a minor constraint, really. And for all that it would take to engineer it, it's not. I don't think it's sort of worth the bother. But the interesting thing here is what it means is that you can have multiple views. One thing that I probably don't use often enough, which it occurs to me you can do, and in fact I will try it. Let's just close one of those. No, so I'll leave this open. Let me go back to this document here. Is, for instance, what I might want to do. I could open this. I could open a new window here. And I could say, right, what I want to do is I just want to see the view only. And I want to make it, so we'll. And now I'm on a couple of screens here, at which point I might put this on the next door screen. And now I could maybe make this even bigger so that I could work on this note. But I would be able to have an overview picture. So that's another way to think about use. You may or may not be aware that you can actually do the same. If I just select a note here, you can actually do the same with the view. You can actually have it text only if you want. If you're just completely working on text and you just want the view out of the way, and it's controlled by the window, and so that they're on it's Command 3, 4, and 5 if memory serves correctly, which allows you to toggle through those three modes. Most of the time, you'll have the two together. The other thing we wanted to show was dragging between windows. So what I'll do is I'll make a new window here on them rather than mess up this person's map. New window. I get a new window of this, and we'll drill down in this note. So in this note, we're actually looking at the child map that we see here. What we might want to do is we might want to drag an alias. Now this is why I always get it wrong, because you have to press. I think it's Option Shift. Is it? There you go. So if I press the Option Shift before I start the drag, I've now created an alias of note AA inside itself, and I've dragged that from one window to another. So that covers a number of things that were being asked on the forum the other day. Can I drag between windows? Yes, I can. Part of it comes about because if you drag out of a window onto the desktop, you'll actually make an OS clipping note. So it also, the same functionality allows that, but I can drag between windows.
Correct, but and on this note, that the one limitation though I think is really important though is the selected note is the one that takes precedence. So if you're in one window and you want to actually look at the attribute values of another note in the second window, you can't do that.
And that's why I mentioned, so if I want to see the context of note BB, but I want to look at the notes, I want to look at AA, I do Command Option X. I now have this visible. I can look at this note, BB selected, but I can see here, and as I say, I'm rather than do it on the fly, but you can, if note AA has displayed attributes, they will be shown as well. So I don't think that limitation really stands, as long as you're prepared to have a few more windows floating around. Which
yeah. It's also important to remember to do that. That's
another
good.
really good use that might not immediately occur for those of you who do export or use action a fair amount. It's often the way that you're trying to work on a function, you're trying to work on a template, and you're typing. You've selected the template, and you're typing in that, you're typing in the note here. But what you really want to see is the note that's using the template, because you're probably going to adjust the template or adjust the function, and then go and use preview or use a stamp that uses the function to see if it works or not. Where it can be useful, therefore, is if you actually put the note that you want. It seems counterintuitive because you think, I want to work on this note, but I would like to see the other thing as the secondary thing. Turn the logic round, say, right, this is the thing I want to work on. And if this was action code, for instance, like a stamp, I'd have code coloring going on here, and then I can use the main window to, I might be in a long outline and I want to go and select something, and then I want to preview it. And whereas this note might be a template that's much further down the outline. So don't overlook standalone windows. It's quite natural that because the application opens in this sort of tabbed format with a single window with tabs within it, which is in a sense sort of not a constraint, but it's a historical start point. And as shown, it proved that whilst in most cases you'll probably find working in one window with one tab, because however many tabs you have here, only the frontmost one is active. So it doesn't matter if you have more tabs, but broadly it just makes for a very messy tab bar and you can't read them. So don't overlook the find where it is, the gallery. If you never come across it, look up the gallery, and what the gallery allows you to do is to take any tab that you currently have, what's on the current tab, and you can save it. Now, where this is really useful is that, let's say you've done something like you've spent some while making a quite complicated crosstab view or attribute browser or something like that. You can effectively save that view in the gallery and close the tab. And then you might want it back again. Or what you could do is,
going back to the point of attribute browser, what you just said is critical. So if you have a bunch of columns you've added to attribute browser, those get saved, and then you can pull that back. Really, really great for repeated analysis exercises.
Yeah, it's probably not something you. That's closer, so I don't have too many stuff. I'm going to open. So something I actually use quite a lot when I'm writing ATB ref is, for instance, so a document will remember for a given tab, it will remember what columns are on. All right, they're on already in this case. So this just tells me what I'm seeing here is which notes have got pictures associated with them. It's a bit of a historical hangover because way back when it was just easier to have one external picture per note. I could use more, but I have to rewrite all the sort of templates and things for that. But I can toggle columns on or off. Where I find them extremely useful is when I'm doing the sort of research that I tend to do. It's sort of semi-qualitative. So often what you're doing is you're wanting to, for instance, see if you've got any notes where you have no value in an attribute. or if you have column view on, it's very, very easy. As ever, I never have quite the right sort of display thing. But I mean, this column here on the right, as you go up and down, you even by eye, you can just see that the text is a different length. So it can be a really good way of speed proofing. If you've, say, been working on a set of research notes and you've been applying attribute values to them, it's a really, really easy way. If you just expand the whole outline and you can just whiz down by eye and spot the few things that aren't right. You might say, well, why don't you use an action? That's fine if you want to find an empty note. It's not so useful when you want to find one note in 1,000 that's got one spelling mistake that you don't know. And just sometimes whizzing past by eye is fine. Depending on how powerful your Mac is, just bear in mind that by and large, and especially if you're working a long outline, it's a good idea to turn the view off. The tab won't forget what columns you have set, but it's having to do less work as you scroll up and down the outline. It's having to draw less stuff on the screen, so it's enlightened self-interest.
Hey, Mark and Chuck, before we go to Chuck, can you go back to your other demos, the other two?
Yeah.
There's one other kind of pop-up that's really useful that people may not be aware of. So, like your two blank files, or did you close?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, doesn't matter. I just
closed it. It's all right. Yeah.
I just don't want you to have to mess up your file. So
That's
go
okay.
ahead. Go ahead and create two notes real quick. Create a Tinderbox file. Yeah, that's fine.
I'll just put them here.
And then create there. Now link those two notes. Okay. Now I do this. I do the linking. It doesn't matter what link type. Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Hit Command 7. Okay. Now this is really, really. I do this all the time. So when I'm writing, I have a means where I will have a terms attribute, and I'll write in a term that's related to this note. And I've got action code that will automatically go create that term for me if it doesn't already exist. And if it does exist, it will just link to that note. Now, if you mouse over, you see how that note's popped up. So I can actually see the definition of the term if the note already exists. Now, Mark, can you mouse back over and then tear it off?
I'll just put something in so we can see.
You can see it.
It's easier if there's something there. So we'll go to that.
I was going to get to that though, right? So if you mouse over, I think you have to
click on it. Yeah.
Now, but let's say there wasn't anything there, or even if there is, let's say you're seeing there and you're like, look, that's not correct. Why don't you tear it off real quick? So go mouse over that on the bottom. Now you've opened that up as a separate window. You can then define that, add attributes, manipulate that note, and close it, and then go back to your work. So it allows you to like work with linked note. That's why this is one of the areas where linked notes in Tinderbox is incredibly powerful, is you can stay in context with what you're working in with other notes that are linked to this note, edit them, modify them without really losing the context of where you're working in right now.
Mm-hmm. And you'll notice in this case, I was talking about the fact that when you have a torn off note, if it has displayed attributes, lo and behold, they're there. Something to bear in mind is that if you think you've changed something in one window and it's not there in another, normally just changing focus from one to another will prod the application to redraw. It's terribly easy to think, well, why isn't it all immediately updating? But there's an awful lot going on behind the curtain, and at some point, not everything can be at the front of the queue. So don't worry about it. It will catch up, but if it doesn't, normally simply just changing the focus, switching. In this case, if I basically was to switch from here to here and back again, that would cause this window to redraw.
Yep. All right, a couple more questions, and then if those that want to stay around, I can give you a 5-minute demo on a command line tool. Let's go with Chuck. You've been waiting a while.
Okay. It doesn't matter to me. I was just going to throw out something. We're at the end of the time period here. I'm just going to throw out something that might be a concept for a future discussion. As far as I know, and maybe I just have missed it, a lot of the things that Mark Anderson was just demonstrating are things you can only do manually within the user interface of Tinderbox. If I wanted to have action code to automatically bring up a text window, I'm not aware of a way of doing that.
And I have come across some interesting areas where I think it would be very helpful to have the ability to have programmatic control over what is displayed in front of you, and tools for managing that those sets of displays. Because I find that in my work, I wind up opening up lots of text windows, multiple windows into the document itself, and managing that for a particular type of application is something that you'd like to be able to put some, I guess, discipline around, which action code would be good for. So I just throw that out as something. If other people have similar issues or problems, maybe it's something that we could talk about for a future meetup.
Can you use keyboard maestro for any of that? I'm not really a maestro, so I don't know.
You could, but the problem is, how do you program it when you want to bring up a text view of a particular note that might be and in turn might be a set of reference material that you want to work with in that document?
So then in that case, maybe something like Alfred, I don't know enough, but there might be some that allow you to enter,
right.
Some text, and then that turns into it, and it finds a note matching that and opens it. I don't know.
Right. Mostly I just threw it out. We're talking about the topic of opening up multiple windows and the different types of windows that you could have. And I just, since I've come across the need, I just thought I would throw that out there and see if other people have encountered a similar need. And if so, maybe it's something worth talking about. That's all. And I'll shut up.
Perfect. And Art, you had your hand up earlier. Last comment?
Oh yeah, just real quick. I had like 3-4 sort of added up questions as Mark A was doing a few things. So I thought I saw you accessing the gallery from a tab. Is that did you do that from the menu?
Yes, if you right click on any tab, you'll see the third item down says gallery ... And if you hit it up, I'll put a link in the sidebar in the chat to some information about the gallery for those who are unfamiliar with it. Give me a second.
Oh, that's awesome. I missed that one. Thanks for pulling it up, Art.
Yeah, so awesome. Okay, and then the second one was so if I'm looking for a string within a value of an attribute, so only a partial, say I remember, oh, I have an attribute value saying economy. It could be economy, it could be economies. So I just want to search for econom. Could I would do that with regex, yeah?
Sorry, I missed. I was just typing. What you using a regex where?
No, if I'm looking for a particular string, which is a partial value of an attribute, so say one of my attributes, the value is economies. Okay, but I don't
think Mark will probably correct me. I don't think the search boxes. If you're in the inspector and you start typing, I don't think you can type a regex in for completion.
No, agent. Just like, if I were to create an agent, that's also fine.
Yes. But if you're trying to effectively autocomplete an attribute name,
no, not an attribute name, a value of an attribute.
So Art,
a value. There is a degree of autocomplete. I have written up roughly the heuristics such as I understand them.
I'm not even looking for autocomplete. I'm just looking to
Art, let me show you real quick. So there's a couple ways to do that. Yes, you could do it using regex with agents. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the find bar is actually pretty fine-tuned. And if you can turn off search name, search text.
Okay, how did you get terms there? I never
search on term user attribute. So here I could say, I want to search one of my user attributes. I want to search the user attribute term, and I want to look for economy. So now it's going to search the whole file, and only in the user attribute term look for that string.
Well, that's crazy good. I never knew it was.
Oh, that's really, really, really powerful.
Fabulous! Thank you so much. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, and that actually answers my third question. So I'm done.
All right. And then again, I know we ran over, but I did want to show you all this morning something very cool with Tinderbox, and then we can go into it in detail more later if you'd like. But I use a enterprise grade time tracking software just to keep track of my time. So I was playing with the ChatGPT conversations this morning, worked on Patreon stuff, worked on my doctorate, transcribed some of my doctorate stuff, walked the dog, cooked breakfast, and then been doing this community thing here later. But then it dawned on me, being stuck in the browser interface, and I do all my work in Tinderbox, how can I make this easier? And I found this Clockify command line tool. So some of the benevolent of some really great coders out there have built a command line, Mac OS command line, that interfaces with this enterprise grade software called Clockify. So with some help with the community and the forum that helped me get over some mental humps in going through the process, I was able to go ahead into my Tinderbox file. And let's say I've got this note here, and I'll set it to time now, just so for the purposes of this demo. And now plus 1 hour. So I'm so let's say I was managing my time. It could have been a meeting. It could have been any number of different projects. As I was showing earlier in the class, you could set up like what projects you're working on and all of that. Then I created a stamp. And by the way, here's a great example of undoing the what Mark was just talking about. Is if you're working on the stamp, you can hit open up a new, not new tab, sorry. You can go open up in new window, text window. And so now you could have my stamp, I could have my stamp code off to the side while I'm writing my stamp, working on that note. And that's a really effective way of working on a note and refining your stamp. And that's the color coding that Mark was talking about. So what I was able to do is saying, okay, here are the different parameters that I need to be passing to the command line. And here are the different, and then I've basically constructed code here to do that. So now you'll see if I'm over here, there is my enterprise grade Clockify. And if I've now selected this stamp and I just apply the stamp, submit to Clockify, Clockify now will go and our Tinderbox will now go and automatically add that time to Clockify. So now I'm able to, through the command line, submit time into my enterprise grade software. And that's a really great example of how apps that support the command line can work well together. And we can deconstruct this later, but I can show you, and we can talk about maybe in a future one if people are interested, how I figured out with the help of Mark Bernstein and Anderson, and most specifically Roger Alexander, to leverage what this coding documentation was showing me on how to link the two pieces of Tinderbox and this other service together.
That's marvelous. Actually, I would love to for us if we could have a focus on just using API because I really am so rusty. I don't know how I can leverage other apps or even access notes within Tinderbox.
Yeah, and here's a really cool one that I figured out too. We can certainly do that. And then here's a great example of having the command line return values to the text. So I'm asking in this command line, I'm saying, hey, go grab the list of projects that are in the file. So if I apply that stamp to the project list, it comes back and gives me the project list in the file. So it's basically gone to the app and pulled out all of the command line codes and dropped it in. So pretty wickedly cool.
Yeah, cool. So that's two ways basically. You can talk to and receive from, essentially.
Yes.
Awesome.
I can push content and I can get content back.
Very, very, very cool.
And that's exactly what Roger Alexander and I are in the behind the scenes have been working on, how to do that with ChatGPT. Submit a question to ChatGPT and have it feed the answers back into Tinderbox. And hopefully Roger will have something up to show us in short order.
This is the do my homework stamp.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. No, and actually I'm teaching a class that's saying, like, look, I know you're going to use it, but remember, it's not always correct and it's never cited. So if you do use it, I need you to cite ChatGPT and also verify for your own intelligence that it's correct. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, everybody, this was fun today. Any follow-up, final comments, thoughts, ideas before we call it a day and go watch football if you're in America? Big day of football.
Other than the fact that I use Clockify, you use Clockify, I use Tinderbox, you use Tinderbox, but for some reason I'm sitting here getting depressed. No, everything's fine.
Well, I only use Clockify because of you, Bruce. You're the one that introduced it to me. I just finally gotten good at doing it.
Yeah, but you went to the moon with it. Let me back on Earth.
Just one last comment is, Mark, if you could add that note that you could enter now in the date field. I actually never knew that. If you could put that into ATB ref.
Oh yeah,
Is that
you
format?
can enter now.
what these are the date placeholders. Yeah,
You
okay.
can say now, yesterday, tomorrow,
Okay.
and it will recognize that.
I'm
Yeah,
actually gonna have to drop off in a second, but I'll put a note on the Meetup thread pointing. It is actually in ATVRF. I just need to show you where it is.
Okay, outstanding. Okay. Yeah, actually,
but by all means, one thing. Well, there's a good case in point is if when I've shown you where it is, you can explain to me why it's not linked from where you expect it to be.
Got it.
That's really helpful because I mean, the really hard part of writing a resource like that is knowing where people are expecting to start or the way they're going to phrase the question they're trying to answer. And I can normally resolve that if I know that missing bit of the jigsaw.
Totally understood. Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
So today, good session for everybody?
Fantastic.
Awesome. Thoroughly enjoyed
Michael,
it. Go Niners.
on ChatGPT, from my class, I told the students something similar. They had decided, but they also have to give me the prompt they used.
Yeah, I did too. And I actually crafted the citation is ChatGPT, today's date, quotes the question you asked it and the date you asked it. Right. And so I said, look, I know you're going to do it. So just be honest, have academic integrity and be honest about it.
Yep.
But presumably
I win on the whole Tinderbox ChatGPT thing. Wasn't it you that did it?
Yes.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, well, just don't trust it. Right? That's a good example. I mean, it's got Windows shortcuts.
Well, what's great about ChatGPT, it says it with such authority. You're like, it must be right, even though it's like my daughter. She can just say it, and I'm like, you're bullshitting me, right? And she's like, yeah. With such conviction and authority, it sounds right, even though it's not.
And there were some things in there that sounded plausible enough that I spent a little time like trying to do a thing in Tinderbox that just did not work.
Yeah. I think a lot of the prompts are taken from Creative Suite by the looks of it. That was because I spent a while sort of looking through, and I'm really glad you shared that because it really helps make sense of the limitation. The interesting thing about citing it is, as far as I understand, these systems run off a large language model that's constantly being updated. So even if you cite the prompt you used at a certain time, unless the system, I don't know, the system remembers what its previous reference was.
No, it doesn't.
It won't.
It doesn't.
It's just about academic integrity. It's like any reference. Like you can see a reference and then you come back 2 years later and the URL for that article or that book might be gone. But at least it's better than nothing, right?
No, it's like when I was doing research on Wikipedia, and far later than I would have liked to have known it, someone said, you do understand that no two queries work the same on Wiki.
Yeah.
And technically, you could ask the same query a week later and you'd get a modified answer because, the corpus has changed since.
Right. Awesome. Hey, everyone, this was great. We had a high-level thought, detailed little tips and tricks. Good session today.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye-bye. That was fun. Go Niners.